again, the first time I really got to know Rick was back in the mid-'80s when we actually just couldn't get insurance for the outfitting industry. And Rick was able to come up with a couple of different solutions that ended up saving our industry, just because prior to that, if you couldn't get insurance, the managing agencies wouldn't issue you a permit to you. So you had to show that you had insurance. And it was a very touch and go time for us. I think it was, 84, 85, somewhere in there. And then you came up with a couple of different things, and I think eventually, didn't we pass a bill called the Risk Retention Act somewhere in that process?
Yep, that was passed. It's 1945, the Risk Retention Act, and it allowed, overcame state law, which made you buy insurance within your state.
So was that 45 or 85? 1985.
1985,
probably.
Yeah. And so you form an association. The association can provide insurance to its members, and they all have to be like, kind, and quality, which recreational guided activities is what Worldwide Outfitter and Guide Association was formed and started in 86, and it still provides coverage with, Prime Insurance Company being the carrier that issues the association a master policy, which the easiest way to explain it is when you buy health insurance, your employer has a master policy and you enroll in it, and all the terms and conditions are agreed to by the employer. So in this case, it's kind of agreed to by the industry. You'll wear life jackets, you'll have wetsuits in these conditions, and those are conditions of the master policy that the association is, putting standards in place to hopefully make themselves more attractive to insurance companies, right? So that, so we can, win these claims where somebody dies from a heart attack in the boat and they try and say it was your fault. Well, no. He could have died at home in his lazy boy. I think we did him a favor. That was a way better place to die, right? The guides and the company have to deal with all the bullshit and, all the recovery and whatever. So it's not something you want to happen. But if somebody falls out of a boat and drowns, do you want to pay them? That's really life insurance is what you're talking about. And that's where when we first got into it, the whole system was like, well, you have to pay anybody that's injured or dies on your trip. Oh, you mean like life insurance? No, they should buy life insurance if they want life insurance. You were required to carry liability insurance that names the U.S. government as additional insured and waives subrogation, and you're the guy running the trips. And at that point, we just provided general liability. Now we provide general liability and professional, because legally, that's something lawyers started throwing in there. When you do rescue, first aid, like in your case, they're suing you for it and you don't have coverage. That's half a solution, which that's why I tell people you need a policy like you need a hole in the head. What you need is a partner that understands that it's not really in their best long-term interest to not cover you the way you need to be covered, right?
Well, I think the other thing that plays into that is a lot of the agencies, they started keeping track of accidents. And for a while there, it was, for an outfitter to have a reportable accident, it was about, for every 5,000 people they took down the river, they had one accident. Right. And I think when we got involved with you guys and started doing all the other training, and I started doing the Rescue 3 courses with all my guides and all that sort of stuff, our ratio was one accident for every 19,000. So it was pretty high up there, and I don't think anybody else in the industry even came close to that.
Right. And it, statistically, it wasn't dangerous, right? But everybody says it's high risk, high risk. I'm like, well, kind of depends on who you go with, right? Like when you took me kayaking down the Rio Grande, I had no clue whether it was dangerous or not. That's why I said, well, take me on a trip. And, the way you did it and the way that you've done it, from your experience, it was as safe as a pool setting, really, right? There wasn't any really risky. We weren't in Class 5 water, or we were in rapids where people could learn, and it was very safe. Knowing how you set it up and saw it, same with Martin Litton on Grand Canyon, they did it in a safe way where they were ready. I could also see where somebody doesn't know what they're doing. It could be very risky to teach people, you know, if you don't know how to take care of them when shit happens. So,
Well, I think the biggest part of that is you've got to try to put people into a situation that is comparable to what their skill level might be, and you got to sort of match that to what the river's doing. I mean,
Right.
you're not going to throw anybody into peak water
right,
they've never been in. You're going to send. That was a great thing about the Rio Grande, was it was warm water. It was down there on the border, so we had
Right.
hot springs that we could hang out in.
the
teach
biggest
people
risk
how to
was
roll.
the Mexicans shooting at you across the river.
That happened later, but
Right.
not when we were there.
Right. Yeah. Anyway, that was a good trip.
Yeah, it was kind of funny that you mentioned that, and we went down there. I think either later that season or the next year when that had happened, and it was some kids over on the Mexican side that I think they were high on something, and they had a 22 and a 30-06, and I think it was a far-flung trip, was going down the river, solo boat, and these guys started shooting at him, and the guy just had everybody jump over to the side of the boat, and he worked the boat over to shore, and then was able to get people to kind of crawl up into the bushes and behind rocks and stuff. And I think it was a guy and his wife that were the clients, and the guy was shot, I think, in the belly. And then the guide actually was able to crawl out and go and get help. And then about the same time, he had a shuttle at the bottom end, and they didn't turn up, so they sent somebody down looking for him. And the woman, when the boat came down, she wasn't even willing to go out and call out to him because she was still afraid it could be those guys that were shooting at him, those teenage kids.
All right.
And eventually they pulled her out, and I think they saved the guy. And I think the guide actually, he was shot in the leg when he crawled out, so he did
Right.
a hell of a job to get him out of there.
No, and there was maybe one other event, but over all the years, it's not
Yeah.
a lot of risk. But again, that you want to be covered for that. Assault and battery. That's what that is. It's a criminal act. Not by company. And then again, if you're the outfitter, you just need to know you're covered for everything, right? Just let's get to the end.
Yeah.
Let's not carve off little pieces and make more money for lawyers. And that's really what's wrong with insurance today. It just keeps evolving in the wrong direction. And, again, buyers, people say, how did you start in the business? And I'm like, well, I insured the land of the misfit toys, right? The people who were labeled uninsurable. Right, and that was recreation at the time because people said release words weren't any good. Now it's homeowners in California and wildfire.
Yeah.
I didn't target them, right? It's the regular industry, puts them in the land of the misfit toys, and then people actually are looking for, different thing than when they were looking for cheap insurance that failed them, right? So there's an opportunity there that it's the same opportunity. And after you stabilize it, there's other markets who come in and say, oh, we can now do that. And that's what's happened with the motocross industry. They left for cheaper rates, and now they can't get coverage anymore. Minors can't do it. Release forms are no good. And I'm like, well, that's because you followed the wrong path,
Yeah.
right? It doesn't mean that the laws still aren't there that give you got to be above the standard of care. Doesn't matter whether it's rafting or whatever. And I remember back in the day, I don't know if you remember this or not, but Joe Tonsmeyer had the one boat trip. And there was some expert who wrote a book saying you can't do one boat trips.
Mm-hmm.
And there was the Canadian event where the guy forced everybody into one boat. And I mean, there's so many different things going on. And like a lot of things, the world has no clue what's going on, right? And when you're in the microscope, you think the whole world's watching it, but really, there's not. The whole world isn't paying attention to rafting or boat racing or whatever's going on, right? And so, having a plan for what happens, like we defended your case based on the fact that you were above the standard of care and you saved the kid's life. And then they wanted to make it more your responsibility and basically, said you should let him die. It would have been cheaper. And I've heard that from lawyers, that's what they say in injury cases where people survive, which that's the math a lawyer likes. But if you're not liable for the accident, you pay zero. The other thing I remember was that, when we're investigating, he had been trained as a lifeguard, right? And in lifeguard training, one of the things they teach you is don't dive into bodies of water.
Yeah.
Right? So, I mean, again, as the case went on, if he hadn't been trained as a lifeguard, he wouldn't have had that information. So that's assumption of the risk right there.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, again, even if he'd have just done a racing dive instead of a pike dive.
Swan dive or whatever
Yeah,
you called it.
the water was 4 foot deep and it was a sandy bottom. He did a deep dive instead of a shallow dive.
Right.
Okay, so let's start from the beginning, tell that story, and then we can just talk about it.
So, which story are we talking about now?
The dive.
The dive thing.
From the beginning, that you
Yeah.
told me in the car.
Yeah.
Wasn't his name Abrams? Wasn't that the case?
Scott Abrams, does that sound
Yeah.
right, Jackie?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That made it all that more interesting because no lawyer wanted to
To
take
get
the case.
yeah,
Right?
and get on the downs and
He's the
backside.
federal court judge, and I don't want to get involved in this.
Yeah.
So what? This was the kid that dove off
The side of the raft, and they said you should have had no diving stickers on the raft like a pool. And I remember me saying, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. What boat? The boat I go to at the lake doesn't have no diving stickers on the deck of the boat.
I've never heard that one before, but anyway, it was off the bow of the boat that he jumped up off. Yeah, it wasn't the side. Yeah.
So anyway, the accident, do you remember what year it happened? What river it was on?
It was on Desolation and Gray Canyons, and it was, I think, probably 85, 86, somewhere in there. It was pretty early on in our boating career with you, and it was right after, we had met you and got the insurance, and we had this contract with Cherry Creek School District that had 4 alternative schools, and we would take those 4 different groups on multi-day river trips because, that's what the people that ran alternative schools, it was into experiential learning, and that's what they wanted to do, is they want those kids to get out and actually experience things, and the interaction between themselves and the instructors and the guides, that was one of the important things to them. And we always met them the night before, and we'd gone over all of the safety talks and that sort of stuff, the do's and don'ts, and, don't go hiking on your own, always go with somebody if you're not with a guide, and all those kind of things. And then in the morning, we did just the kind of proper river safety talk that we always do. And one of the things that was good, and I think to help you in this case, was the fact that the ranger that was there actually wrote on the trip affidavit that it was the best safety talk he'd ever heard. And then we put all the boats together, because the way the river's set up is there's 26 miles of flat water to begin. So we were trying to push through that flat water to get down into the inner gorge of the canyon where, they got sheer walls and better flow of the river and rapids and those kind of things, and places to hike to see pictographs and petroglyphs and all sorts of Indian paraphernalia and that sort of stuff. And we were 6-8 miles into the trip, and it was a hot May day, and the kids wanted to go for a swim to cool off, so we stopped the motor that we were pushing all those boats with, and kids started going into the water feet first, and this other kid, this Scott Abrams kid, got up on the bow of the boat and goes, "Hey, everybody, watch my pike dive," because I guess he was a bit of a show-off and wanted a bit of attention. And long story short, the kid behind him, who was kind of over him being that sort of an individual and trying to focus attention on himself, put his hand on his butt and pushed him. And he went in head first. And when he presented as a C-spine injury, which is face down, arms out in front. And the other gal that was a trip leader, she recognized that immediately because we trained that in our Rescue 3 Swiftwater programs, and jumped into the water and did a C-spine roll and got his face out of the water and opened his airway and was able to sort of stabilize his neck. And then at the same time, everybody else on the trip was stripping the gearboat down and trying to get to the backboard that we stabilized him on. And somebody cut the neck off of a Type 5 life jacket and used that as a C-spine collar and put that on with cam straps, and were able to start motoring him back upstream. And then the other thing that happened is the gal that had done the C-spine roll, she was actually a marathon runner, and she got on her running gear and they dropped her off on shore, and she started running that 6 or 7 miles that it was back to the put-in. And even though she had to get up on the plateau and come back to the river every time there was a side canyon, she still made it back before those guys got back upstream with the boat. And then she went to the ranger and they tried to radio out, and their battery was dead. And then they went to jump in his truck and go to the rim, and battery in the truck was dead, and our vehicles had already gone because we had people with us to drive shuttles. And so they had to start looking through other people's vehicles to find some keys to actually get up to the rim to call out. They called over here to Salt Lake to get a helicopter, and it was in for repair. And then they finally found one out of Grand Junction, and the one in Grand Junction was actually on a mission, so they had to wait for it to finish its mission before they could send it up to the put-in there at Deso. And so they were there for an hour or two before the helicopter got there, and the kid kept saying to the ranger, "Oh, they told me not to dive. I was just showing off." And so all those things, I think, kind of came back to help with the process that we said that, it really wasn't our liability. It was just one of those things that happens, an accident.
Yeah. So, again, I think the biggest opportunity is when you're wrong, like in that case, right? If you'd have been at fault for the accident, we should have just paid, right? I've handled 400,000 claims now, bigger nightmares, 8 people burnt, 6 people dead when tankers crash and stuff. And the key is to get the money, and admit you're at fault. And again, in most cases, when you're not at fault, you go along and, like in trucks now, they have video and it shows they're not at fault and they still pay the claim. And I'm like, so why would you spend the money on the cameras? Why would you spend the money training your guides to save this kid who, with other guides that weren't as experienced, probably would have died? He would have never made it out of there. So when you go the extra mile to do all that stuff, you have to finish, you have to execute all the way through the end result. Because at the end of the day, if you pay a $5 million claim you could have paid $300,000 on, that's going to affect the future of the industry. And the lawyers are going to see it as opportunity for them. So, insurance is kind of like defense, right? When you're right, you need an offense to be able to protect your industry and your business. And, the whole thing is set up to be nice and pay and just settle. 98% of all things are settled. That's why you end up uninsurable, either because, you have a bad product, you created an unsafe car or tobacco, right, and you lied to people. But when you do everything right, is the court system fair? I believe it is. So why does the insurance business put out the list of the 10 biggest legal hellholes? Right? I mean, that's just, to me, that's kind of like selling everybody on, you don't want to mess with the courts. You don't want to trust a jury. And again, I trust in juries. We just had 2 cases, both in Florida, legal hellholes that a big law firm, well-known, biggest in the country, they're demanding $5 million on one. The jury gave them a 0. The other one, they were demanding $1 million. Jury gave them a 0. A lot of what they demand is based on the limits that you provide, which has always been an issue. I think we both went to D.C. and testified because there's always a push for more limits, especially when they're on government land. And, I think a lot of cases that I can think of, the Canadian one where you have more than one injured person or more than one plaintiff, If you just have $1 million limit or a $5 million limit, that one person gets the whole thing, and none of your other people have insurance, and you don't have any more protection. So that's why per person, per accident, and aggregate. You know, if you want to have a $5 million yearly limit, but cap it at $1 million for any one claim, and maybe $500,000 per any one person, and then that's what the lawyers are looking at. That's why they sue. They want to know who their opponent is, and they want to know what playing field they're playing on. What's the limit? What's the potential? So, having a plan, we did it by the seat of our pants then. Now I have thousands of lawsuits where it's processy, and my biggest deal is who's my partner, right? Are we going to be able to achieve the best, or are you going to start listening to a lawyer? And, in our deal, what I remember is neither of us liked any of the lawyers, right? They were all trying to push it in their direction. And again, this is your company.
Yeah.
This is your legacy. This is the way you do business. And you're a leader in the industry at the time. Back then it was kind of like the Wild West, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Some guys had permits, some guys didn't.
Well, again, I think one of the things I wasn't too keen on a lawyer, but I did have a lawyer that I think I brought to the table, and it was a guy like you that I'd taught how to kayak. So I'd taken him on several river trips, and he kind of knew the type of organization that we ran, and we'd got to know him, and he was an outdoor person, so he understood what we were trying to do.
Right. Yeah. That's why when people want to hide behind the curtain like Wizard of Oz, that's always made me uncomfortable, right? We should know each other, because if you don't, you have no chance in a tough situation. It's like on the playground when you needed friends that stuck with you and friends that ran away. Yeah. And a good friend will tell you, this is, we screwed up, we should just pay. And that's the little secret that I think nobody wants you to know. And Parker got me involved in this motocross roundtable where the plaintiff's lawyer was telling people, I'm your worst nightmare. I'm the guy that keeps you up at night. I'm going to come take your stuff. And I got a $22 million judgment. And this is all on Zoom. And, I told him, I said, quit saying that. I know that's a fake judgment. The guy didn't have insurance, and you took his land. And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, I would have given him insurance of like $500,000 to $1 million, because that's what would be reasonable. And when that accident happened, I would have paid you. And he says on the video, and by law, I would have had to have taken it, because it's reverse bad faith if he doesn't take a reasonable offer.
Yeah.
But if you miss that opportunity because you have a policy, not a partnership, where you can't be honest with people and you can't change the accident happened, right? That would be nice if you could. But having the plan to, get a soft landing for everybody. We're not trying to take advantage of the plaintiff. We're trying to pay him the right amount, right, for the setting we're in. And, recreation, it's very safe, as you were saying, statistically, it's all safe. But, some old guy like me wants to go ski like I used to when I was young, and I blow my knee out. Whose fault's that? It's not the ski resort's fault, right? And I remember cases where they said, you shouldn't let older people go down the river, or, these people, he had a heart attack, you shouldn't have let him go. And I'm like, that's not our job, right? If some guy just had triple bypass surgery, normally they want to go and they lie on the form.
Yep.
Right? Because they want to go.
We've had that happen.
That basically helps you, but it really shouldn't be that big of, this is America. If you want to die on the Grand Canyon instead of in your home in your lazy boy, that's kind of your choice. Now, outfitter doesn't want to deal with that, right? But you shouldn't be liable for it. So it's really common sense, and the industry has, it's a long history. Small businesses, it's seasonal businesses, and I think the court systems are fair. But you need good partners, not people who abandon you and overpay the claim. Because anytime an insurance company gets out of a business, they just want to close all the claims. Right? They're not going to fight for you anymore. So understanding the goal. What are we trying to do here? Do the right thing, pay when we're liable, but we got to protect the industry, or you're not building a business.
Well, the other thing I think you and I agree on is that when we had that case, that neither one of us thought that we had done anything wrong. We
Right.
thought we'd actually saved the kid's life, and it was probably because of the expertise of the people that were on that trip that he was able to go ahead and continue to function. And I think he realized that, and I think he was the one that kind of convinced his legal team that, here's what I want out of this deal. If I can get this out of this deal, I'm going to be happy.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, Bill, we appreciate you coming on.
Okay.
So why don't you get him to talk about DC and testifying, and you remember that?
Yeah, no.
And the work you did getting both of the rivers protected.
Okay.
Just
Well,
talk away.
Yeah.
I guess that I'll start out by saying that, some of my first trips back to Washington, D.C., I went back with Rick because we were working on this legislation to try to get better insurance procedures and recognize that, we weren't this crazy outdoor industry that was very risky, and that we were actually, if you had trained guides and good people, that it was just like sort of other recreational activities. So I went back several times to testify on these bills, and then that came back to sort of so serve me later, because I was able to first get the Black Canyon of the Gunnison. I went back to try to change the designation. It had always been just a national monument, and it ended at a certain point on the river. And so we actually brought several legislators, senators, congresspeople, showed them the river, showed them what was going on, and were able to get the Black Canyon of the Gunnison National Monument to be included in a Black Canyon National Park system. But one of the issues that we had was a lot of the locals didn't want a national park through that section, because there were certain things you couldn't do there, like hunt and take your dog and horseback in and all those sorts of things. So it became a national conservation area, an NCA. And so the Gunnison Gorge became an NCA within the Black Canyon of the Gunnison National Park, and was regulated by the BLM, who had always regulated it. And then further down the line, I got really involved in trying to protect the area around where I live, which is the Arkansas River in the center of Colorado in Chaffee County. And we originally tried to get about 170,000 acres designated as wilderness, and didn't get very far. And so the long story short of that is we were able to get the actual Arkansas River designated as a national monument, and we were protected about 27,500 acres. But we also got to maintain the designation that was adjacent to it in the Forest Service, was another kind of 50 or 60,000 acres, which was an area where there was no motorized use, those kind of things. So it was actually kind of a protected buffer to the Black Canyon, or not to the Black Canyon, but the Arkansas River National Monument. And so we got that done in, I think, 2005, and kind of the highlight of my conservation career was to go back to the Oval Office for the signing with Obama. And this is one of the things that I think I went back to D.C. about 6 times in regard to the Arkansas River Browns Canyon National Monument, and I think it was the training that I got when I was going back with Rick for this other stuff that helped me kind of talk to the right people and say the right things and know who to get to get that done. So thanks.
Yeah, no, I think that again, I think you were all war crazy. That's why you became outfitters. But you learned how to, get the standards right. And there's, lots of people, Dick Linford, and I can't even remember the far-flung guy, Greg Harris, was that his name?
Steve Harris.
Steve Harris.
Yeah.
And, and Greg Smith up here at Wasatch Powderbird Guides and the Forest Service, and just so many moving parts now. The industry is a lot more stable now than it was then, I believe. And so, anyway, you're trying to pass your company on to somebody, you have like a perfect buyer that you have in mind?
Well, I'd like to have somebody that really knows the industry, that's been involved in the industry. And I had a potential buyer that I talked to 2 years ago, and he actually had a river business, but he himself was not a river person. He was a business person, and he also was outfitting on a resource that was not controlled by the federal agencies. It was controlled by a county agency. And he took a ton of people down the river, and then he wanted me to help train them on the Arkansas. So they came over to do the Arkansas, and I jumped into one of their paddle boats when they first got there. And it was the most god-awful training program I'd ever seen. I mean, didn't talk anything about how to read the water, how to use your crew, how to do different strokes, just threw them into the boat and bounced them down the river. And I had never been so beat up in my life as after that day in their paddle boat with them. And I refused to get back in a paddle boat with that group of people. I was going to go ahead and be, they needed me to be there because I had the permit on the Arkansas, and that's what they were trying to acquire. And so I rode the rest of the time. And ultimately, I couldn't do it. I couldn't sell it to that guy.
Or are you still going on trips?
I go on a few trips. I don't do a lot of stuff anymore. Back in the day when I first got to know you, I was doing probably 20,000 miles a year down the river because I was starting in March and going into
about
October.
40,000 miles driving on dirt roads.
Oh, twice as much. I always said that for every mile you get on the river, you're doing 5 on the road.
Right.
But
I think that if there's somebody out there that's looking for a business, to me, from your answer, it seems like, you're not just 10 or not. And I think anybody that would do it would have a huge opportunity if with your help, right?
Yeah. Oh, I definitely want to mentor them.
Some period of time,
Yeah.
right? So, without you, I think it would be like jumping off a cliff. But with you, and again, there's all kinds of recreational people, ski resort guys, guys in Hawaii that work for other people in that business. And, I think there's a ton of guys out there that are outdoorsy. They might not know the river as much as you like, but they want to own their own business and be able to build something. So I think that, again, you're looking for somebody in the river business to
And again, if there's somebody that's not familiar with the Arkansas, a lot of people don't realize that it's actually the most popular whitewater river in this country for sure, if not the world. We take 200,000-300,000 people.
More people than any other river.
And, the nice thing about it, it's not concentrated like a river like the Ocoee or some of the rivers in the east that takes a lot of people, and they are always running the same 14 to 20 miles. We have sort of 107 miles of runnable water there. Now, granted that half of that use probably does occur in Browns Canyon. That's the most popular stretch of it. But it's also probably the most beautiful part of it, in my opinion. But there's other beautiful parts as well, and there's everything from Class 2 to Class 5 there. So you've got a very broad experience that you can offer. And what's your thought now on insurance Class 5? And it's been kind of hard to get insurance to do Class 5 anymore.
Well, again, when I first started doing the climbing, we didn't do free climbing, right? And so to me, the world is evolved, right? And the free climbers are taking more risk than anybody else. Right? It's like going to Denali or going to Mount Everest, and they're different trips. I do trips where they just go to base camp and hang out. They're never going to try and summit, right? But again, I have to think about, a lot of them are wealthy, older people who are going with some group, right? And if they were to die of a heart attack or whatever, that's not something we want to pay for, right? So it's about liability, and you can run any class water, right? But you need the right equipment. You need the better trained guides that, are comfortable in that setting. And you need to qualify your participants, just like you said earlier about kayaking. You took me down the Rio Grande. You didn't put me in Class 5.
You didn't put you in Class 3.
Or whatever. So, again, I think it is more exclusive. And one of the things I was talking to holiday about last night, and I remember when we went to D.C. and Exum was renewing their permit, and the rate per day that's approved and all of that stuff. And to me, businesses, a lot of businesses, couldn't survive without the high-end corporate, right? Because like you go to a jazz game or you go to a basketball game, you buy a regular ticket, it's expensive, but there's people paying 100 times that, right? But they're not paying out of their own pocket. It's a company paying for it to create a special, trip. So you have a regular trip that's 20 people, and you can only charge so much. I would think that the industry should have an ability to say, look, we'll take less people, it's less use, but you got to let us charge more money because they want a different experience, right? Just like a suite at the jazz game or a box at a golfing event or whatever. And that could help, small businesses more than anything, not that it would take over your whole thing, and maybe limit it to 10 or 20% of your user days, and it's a program you can opt in out of or opt out. Because it would take, more of it would be more like glamping, I guess you would call it, right? Because that's what they would want, and they're happy to pay for that. But, the way the government regulates what you can charge, and, as permits renew, I see instead of outfitters being confident that, we're an asset to the government, right? They should be respected. The government kind of puts it up to bid, and they're like, I can't increase my rates. I might lose the permit. And I'm like, they're making you take care of all their buildings now. You have to be paid for that. No, we'll just be happy to. I'm like,
well, again, it's another place that you're in partnership. I mean, what you're doing is you're introducing people to their resource.
right.
And then that's one of the reasons I think you get so many people in this business who are more sort of protective of the resource than they are business people.
Right.
They're more conservationists and environmentalists because they recognize the value of that resource, and they recognize their role in exposing people to those resources and getting them to understand the value of them and the beauty of them and why we need to save them and protect them instead of just going out and extracting gas and oil and coal and other kinds of things. There's other reasons to protect these resources.
But getting those, bigger corporate people out in, again, to me, impressive. Grand Canyon, the guides are protecting it. They don't let people drop their cigarette butts. And I mean, most people from San Francisco that I think I've told you this, they, by the end of the trip, you actually liked them. But I think they transform from being a obnoxious city person into somebody who was like, I don't want to leave the river trip now, right? Can I just start over again and go down? But it was nice to get a hot shower after 11 days on the river, right?
Well, again, we've done a lot of trips over the years where we were taking congressional people. We would take senators and Congress people and the heads of the National Forest or the Secretary of the Interior on river trips. And then all of a sudden, they weren't allowed to do trips like that because it was too big of a perk, so that we couldn't actually take them out and showing the kind of things that we were doing with the public. And we had a lot of success back in the day that we were doing those kinds of things. And now you basically not allowed to do them anymore because
their opponent can allege it was
no,
a perk.
it's they actually have they can in theory only take something that's worth a certain value, like it might be $50. I don't even know what the rate is, but if you put together a fam trip with 2 or 3 different outfitters and you put 4 or 5 different senators and congressmen and the head of, say, the national park or something, you just can't do that kind of stuff anymore.
Right. So you remember Diane Pulowski, right?
We
Et cetera.
Oh, yeah.
Marvel Traveling Companions.
Yeah.
She just retired and turned the reins over there. But we did Explore here. We did them. Yeah. We do the National Ability Center. So again, the industry really does have people who specialize in catering to disabled and handicapped people so that you can expose anybody who wants to the outdoors. So,
Back when they started, we actually trained most of the Explorer people,
Right.
you know, because they were really good with their disability, but they didn't have a lot of river experience. So
Right.
we did a bunch of joint trips with them, and we had a lot of training that we did that helped them out.
Explorer was here in Utah. I don't know if they're still here or not, but
You know, I haven't heard anything about them for a while. I kind of lost track of them, but we were very involved with them for, I don't know, 20 years probably. And then that was always one of the things that we were sort of always on the edge with, was because, you know, when I started out, I ran that program for 5 years that was work with adjudicated youth, where we were trying to divert kids out of a path in crime. And we were actually very successful. We actually were the best recidivistic rate of any program that was working with recidivistic youth for the 5 years that we ran partners. And I think a lot of it was that because I got all of my guides at that time frame out of my master's program at CU in alternative and experiential education, and everybody was way in at doing those kind of things. So again, it really depends on the type and the class of people that you get that work with those kinds of groups, how successful you can be.
no, I think that's you give them an opportunity, and those are an opportunity to turn people around. And I say it all the time. Coaches I had in high school and the teachers, you know, that influence your life, and then you think back on the crappy ones. The crappy ones kind of influence you too, because they told you couldn't do anything, and then that was a little motivating. But the people who touch you and, you know, kind of send you in a different path, and the outdoors is an amazing place to experience stuff. It's every trip I ever went on, it's like it's life changing. The longer you were out there, and people you meet, and we had some pretty interesting trips. But
Well, you've got your own little ranch now, and that's the kind of background that I came from. I grew up on a small ranch, and so, I was breaking horses and doing that sort of stuff, and just looking after critters and all that. And I was pretty much a redneck when I first went into college, and that's when I got my eyes open to the value of the resource for other things, for the environment and that sort of stuff. But it took a few years. But
well, you've always guided hunts for other people in Colorado, right?
Yeah, I've been a hunting guide, a fishing guide. I've been a mountaineering guide. So I've done lots of different guiding over the course of my
You
career.
grew up in Colorado?
No, I actually grew up in a small ranch in northern Wyoming, almost into Montana. It's one of the things that attracted me to where I'm at in Colorado right now is it was a very similar locale to where I grew up with, up near Sheridan, Wyoming. Ranchester was actually a nearest little town, 125 people, but we had the Bighorns to the west, and we had the Wolf Mountains to the south, and the river ran right through the middle of it, and the river was in the boundaries of our ranch, the Tongue River. And then when I got to the Arkansas, it was a very similar setting. You had the 14,000-foot continental divide that was to the west of us, and another range of mountains to the east of us, and the river ran down the middle. And I had a lot of river experience by then because I'd taught kayaking and stuff at the Outward Bound School in New Zealand, and had my own program in Australia. I set up the second outdoor education center in Australia and had a canoe program with that, and had a scuba diving charter boat on the Great Barrier Reef in Australia for a year or two. And so I just kind of was into the water, I guess.
We're lucky landed in Colorado. It has such a nice wife.
Yeah. Well, I met her in junior college, and that's what brought me down there. I was actually a pretty good football player. You talk about your high school days and stuff, and I was recruited to a little college up in Billings, Montana, to play both football and basketball. And then a buddy of mine, we had some issues with drinking over the course of our high school career, and he got kicked out his senior year and had to go up to Billings actually to play his senior year. And he calls me up the day before I was going to go up to Montana to this little school, and he says, "Hey, I'm down here at this junior college in Colorado, and we've got a really good team, and I've talked to the coach about you, and we need somebody in your position." And I talked to him for a while, and I was somewhat convinced. And about an hour later, his dad called me up, and he said, "Would you mind going down to where Steve is? Because you've always had a pretty good influence on him." And in the morning, my brother was going to drive us to college, and he says, "Well, where are we going, north and south?" And I said, "Well, hell, I've never been to Colorado. Let's go there." And we ended up being the #1 ranked junior college team in the nation. And then from there, I came over to this country.
Well, and then you went to BYU after that.
Yeah, I played at BYU for 3 years.
They wouldn't let him in today.
Yeah, well,
Couldn't sign the pledge or whatever.
well, that sort of got me out of there in an interesting way, because I wouldn't sign their, whatever they call it, their little document that says you're going to
They
do
had
all
it
these
then.
rules. And after my eligibility was up, I actually had some meetings with Dalen Oaks, who was the president of the school at the time. I think he's some bigwig Moran guy now. And he brought that up to me, and I says, "Well, I refuse to sign that." And he says, "How many hours do you need to graduate?" And I said, 21. And he says, "Sign up for him." So
Get
I
out
did.
of here.
And I'm out of there. Yeah.
So you said the Dvorak, you started it or you bought it?
Well, it started out as Partners River Program. And then
So what? It was in
it was
Colorado. then?
Colorado. And then, it was supported primarily by like Gates Rubber Company and different sort of philanthropic organizations sort of supported them. And they didn't get any government funding. But then
It was troubled youth program.
and then when Ronnie Reagan got elected, he thought that, just throw the little bastards in jail. Don't try to divert them. So
I never heard that.
So he
That's
did away with all
all
the funding for so many of these other programs that had federal funds.
Ah.
And all the little programs we were getting money from all of a sudden, they got a whole lot of extra requests for donations. And they put off giving partners the normal funding that they had for 6 months. And then when it finally came through, it was half of what they were expecting. And so they had to liquidate some assets, and they asked me to buy the river program out. So I did.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And you called it Dvorak Outdoors.
It was kind of funny. I went around and I was talking to a bunch of people that I knew, and I'm saying, what should I call this? And I came up with some names and stuff. And one day, 3 people in a row have said, "Well, hell, Bill, everybody knows your name. Call it Dvorak Expeditions." So we did.
Well, that was the decision you made.
Besides getting married.
Yeah.
Yeah. She's an angel.
I was a child bride.
He's still in
I had to
shade.
get permission from my mother to get married.
Oh, yeah? Well, she knew. Well, anyway, it's been, I don't know, I think 43 years we've known each other.
Yeah.
Been through lots of, ePro and WRGA merged to become America Outdoors, which is the association that's here having their meeting this week. So, I don't know. I think ePro had 300 members and WRGA had,
80.
yeah, but
Might even been 60 back in that day. That was when I was the vice president when we did that kind of merger thing.
Right. And I was against the merger in the beginning because I thought, it was 2 different groups. But overall, I think it's been a good thing. And, there's a lot of variety in there. I know that Exum's here and, some of the other people they've drawn in. We have, I looked last night, got a report. We have 500 outfitter and guide insureds nationwide, including Hawaii and Alaska, and everything from ice fishing guides to rafting, helicopter skiing. So that's a significant number.
Yeah.
I have 10,000 clients nationwide in all 50 states, and nursing homes, physicians, tire stores, exotic car rental. And I don't try and, it's not the industry that's a problem. It's bad people that are a problem. And in any industry, you got bad people, you got good people. And
Yeah.
if you can do business with good people and have a plan to manage litigation instead of it managing you. And the easiest example I have is lawyers are like pitchers in the bullpen. They're not the coach. Right? And as insurance has evolved, they basically outsource everything to a law firm. And it makes it, the coach is the lawyer who really doesn't have the same incentives as an industry. And as lawyers are always going to settle everything. They think that's their job.
Right.
As an industry, if you settle everything, you can't build anything. And again, the answer is, have a plan, have good partners. In anything, if you invest in a business and your partners change their mind at the goal line, you're always going to be discombobulated and confused and look stupid. You're going to make lawyers rich, and lawyers, just like in a bad divorce, they don't care how much of your money they take. At some point, you get worn out and you just give in, and because you have less money. So
Well, I think that's one of the reasons I stuck with you for 40 years.
you didn't want to get divorced? Jackie would have divorced you?
No, it's just the fact that I think we had the same sort of attitude toward, why do you pay out if you haven't done anything wrong?
Yeah.
If you've done your job, if you've done a good job, and something happens, the people ought to be able to recognize that you've done the best that you can, and it's just an accident.
Well, and it is expensive to protect yourself legally, and that's really the complaint is, insurance is expensive, and then it always does the wrong thing. So, again, there's enough money being spent anywhere on insurance, right? It's just what's the outcome, and does it improve the future of you building a business, or do you give it away by taking the easy route and settling claims where you shouldn't ever settle them because, it's a system that's built to leverage you and scare you. Mm-hmm. And you can win. We won your case. I won 4,000 other cases nationwide. Not one has any lawyer ever told me or you we should fight. They're telling you should settle.
Yep.
So, and I've been arrested in Chicago wrongfully, charged with a felony. I could have lost my insurance company. I could have settled, taken a misdemeanor, but I couldn't do it. I was like, this is like the root of my cord. Then I wanted to sue the cops, and they said, you can't. They got immunity. And I'm like, bullshit. That's what you guys tell people. But when they cross the line, their immunity goes away. And then, the biggest case I had was 2008. Sued Countrywide Home Loans, and every lawyer told me I was going to lose. It was up in Heber City, Utah. A jury took 12 minutes to give me $2 million because it was black and white.
Yeah.
They had the appraisers and they hit them, and I don't say there's fate or anything, but I got lucky because the appraiser called me, and he shouldn't have because I don't know who's appraising, but somebody reported him for giving too high of an appraisal on my house, which is what I needed, right? And so when I called Countrywide, they said, no, you didn't qualify for the loan because the best appraisal we got was $2.2 million. Needed to be 5.2. Well, the guy who did a 5.2 appraisal calls me and thinks I reported him to the state. And I'm like, dude, they don't tell me, the borrower, who's appraising. That's like a Chinese wall.
So when you went to the bank, they had their own appraiser.
Yeah, they buried those appraisals and got a fake one. Mm-hmm. And I had the email. I just blew the email up on a board and it said, you could hide those two appraisals. We got a new one coming. And, again, I'd spent $700,000 because I felt like it was my duty. And my best lawyer says, Rick, you should settle for $100. Just take the $100. I'm like, are you crazy? Right? I think I'm going to win, and I want you to quit telling me to settle. Let's go up to bat like we're Hank Aaron, and let's believe we can hit a home run. And, again, they were not happy. Andrew Wright here, $700,000, and they just wanted the exit door. Yeah. Right? They didn't want. And when we won, you'd have think they scored a touchdown in the end zone of the BYU football game and, won the Holy War. And I looked at him and I want that, to me, I was more disappointed because more people don't believe. But obviously, the Chicago case winning that cost me $380,000. I won $200,000. So people say, well, you're dumb. You lost $180,000. I'm like, no, I think my reputation and everything I believe to the core means that I won. Right? If I'd have settled, then I would have been the big loser. So black and white, simple. That's why I think we like each other. We're both simple men, Bill.
That's right.
Yeah, a simple man that flies around in helicopters.
Well, that was
No.
a dream.
You made
They
it
come
happen. You
true.
accomplished your dreams, man.
Huh?
You accomplished your dreams. But one thing I've learned from him is we like doing what's right. Bill, I think you said it. I mean, with claims, if we messed up, we just got to go pay what we owe. But if we didn't, we got to fight. So.
Well, and that was hard to find. There was fights, and I think why he and I get along so well is that he was willing to, and I thought it was important to do it.
You remember Byron Turner,
Yeah,
Gaylord Stavely?
yeah,
All the guys back then at National Forest Recreation Association. And it's a lot of turns and jigs and jags in the road. But hell, I never thought I'd be 50. So,
Well, wait till you get to be 76.
yeah. I'm not that far behind you, but you're looking good.
I try to work at it a little bit.
Glad you guys made it over, and it was good to see you last night. And
Well, thank you again. It was a great dinner.
if I can do anything to encourage some young, energetic guy to come be mentored by you, that would be like,
Well, I'd appreciate that.
they'd be lucky.
Yeah.
Thanks, Bill.
No worries. Thank you, guys.